So this leads us into the question of genre. Versova continued in the interview to say, with chamber music it's generally no problem to get performance, but with symphonies it is much harder. This leaves women with a dilemma. Do you spend your time pursuing concert music, trying to get the commissions that you... Random dude. Anyway, do you spend your time pursuing the concert music, the opportunities that they generally favour men to have in order to attempt to make it as a composer and continue the legacy of women in music, or do you predominantly write for chamber forces? There's only a few people involved, it's a much more controlled environment, you don't have to go via the government in order to get a commission like you had to do with the orchestras, you can kind of be your own agent. In terms of money, surely it would make sense to go with chamber music. Bacewicz's output is fairly balanced between concert music and chamber music, but an interesting thing to look at are the reviews of her work during the time she was alive. The first review we're going to look at is one of the premiere of her partita for violin and piano. She premiered the work herself in Warsaw. The reviewer says, "This composer has no need for sensational effects and is to be commended on the beauty and seriousness of the work. There is a sense of youth in the composition, while simultaneously there is a high degree of maturity. The musical impressions will overwhelm you and the musical thoughts will absorb you. She has a lot to say and she already knows how to say it well." So, as we do in essays, we're going to look at the quote and we're going to pick it apart a bit. Bacewicz is praised for her maturity as a composer in a manner that doesn't seem surprised. So the review is not like, oh my god, a woman wrote a piece of music and it's good. He praises it generally as a work. He doesn't use the fact that she's a woman in the review and actually writes a review that's very positive no matter who you are. Great stuff. So that is an example of a review of a chamber work. Now let's look at a concert work. This review is from the Washington Post. This was the American premiere of her Concerto for String Orchestra. This review goes, "There was nothing feminine about Miss Bacewicz's piece. It was vigorous, even virile, with, in the first movement, a pulsing, throbbing rhythm and bold thematic material. It was either conservatively modern or radically classical. In any case, it was worth listening to." So, not cool. What a complete backhanded compliment to say this piece was really good, because it didn't sound feminine, it didn't sound as if it was written by a woman. Now, those of you who were in my class last year, which I believe is all of you, will know when you're played a list of works and I don't tell you who the composer is and I ask you to say if this is written by a man or a woman, you can't tell. You literally can't tell. So, what does he mean by a feminine sound? And do all pieces need to sound masculine in order for them to sound good? You can see I'm getting kind of ranty now. But what a completely different review to the one of her chamber work. Now, is this because of the genre? They were also premiered in different cities, one in Warsaw and one in Washington. Surely you would think the American review, the piece that was played in America, would be better received than the one in Poland, where they are supposedly behind in the times because of the Soviet rule. We're stumped. Another piece of writing about one of her concert works, this is actually a press note as opposed to a review, is for her first violin concerto. Now, she premiered this work herself with the Polish Radio Symphony Orchestra, and this one gets on my nerves even more than the one about the Concerto for Orchestra, because it says this is the first piece written in the world of music literature by a woman. No. What it means by piece here is violin concerto. Yes, because not a single woman wrote a violin concerto before the early 20th century. Hundreds of years women were like, oh no, better not write a violin concerto. Oh, blimey, no, that's not cool. Piano concerto, sure, but violin, untouchable. Complete rubbish. Now I can tell you now, Ethel Smith wrote a concerto for violin and horn in 1926. That wasn't even 10 years earlier. The writer of this press review was clearly using the fact that Bacewicz was a woman in order to gain marketing, in order to further the agency of Bacewicz. Whether this was for good reasons or bad reasons, hard to say. But it's not like Bacewicz says, I'm the first woman to write a violin concerto in order to promote herself. As we've already discussed, there was distinct lack of opportunities for women, and the women had to create their opportunities themselves. They had to advertise themselves. And no point at all does Bacewicz use her gender to publicise herself. So this is ethically really rather wrong, as well as being completely incorrect to begin with. Another final review we're going to look at, this is another chamber review, and this is of her fourth sonata for violin and piano. She was a known interpreter of this work herself and played it many times over her lifetime with her brother Kjestut on the piano. Our final review says, the Sonata No. 4 for violin and piano by Grażyna Bacewicz was performed in the United States for the first time. This piece was the most impressively touching and controversial on the whole programme. The composer is a master of melody, which challenges the listener in the way it is expressed. So, there's not a distinct thing here saying this is a piece by a woman or anything like that. It doesn't even use the word she. There is no mention of gender. However, picking it apart, if we look at the language that's used, the things that stand out are impressively touching and controversial. As Susan McClary, the musicologist, says, women's music is generally about the divine love. Or this is how people see it. Everything's emotional, everything's about love. So it's impressively touching. Is the touching element of it impressive because of something? Or is it just, this touched me more than I thought it would? Oh, delightful. The important bit is the controversial bit after. Why is this piece controversial? It's not so much stylistically controversial. It kind of was in the Eastern Bloc, but less so elsewhere. This review is from Boston in the United States, so it's not as if Bacewicz's style, as unique and wonderful as it is, would have come as a great shock in America compared to what some of the other composers were doing at the time. So this leads us to the question, is the piece controversial because it's written by a woman? Are women's works controversial? No. So, how do these ideas affect Bacewicz herself as a violin virtuoso? There's not an awful lot of footage of Bacewicz playing because of the era this was from,